So most buyers look at a listing and we zero in on one number. We ask ourselves, can we afford this? And based on that one number, the price, then we decide if the deal is even possible. Is that the best place to start?
I think that's a mistake, and most people who buy businesses would say that that is a mistake because the price isn't the deal. The structure is the deal. And very often, when you consider and you know how to do creative structures, you can do better deals, you can buy better businesses. And the buyers who only understand and only look at the price cannot even consider some of the options and often don't have the ability to buy businesses that would be open to them if they only knew how to structure the deal.
Okay. So today we're going to be talking about deal complexity tolerance and what exactly that means. And that's how we're structuring the deal, right?
Correct. Where the price point matters, of course it matters, but it's not about just signing a check and giving the seller that check. It's about engineering a deal in a way that the seller gets what they want and we also get what we want, creating that win-win deal. And there are many ways, creative ways, to write deal structures so that you can buy businesses that are bigger and more profitable.
Yeah. And I know from experience that is something you are so great at coming up with creative ways to finance. But before we get into that creative stuff, can you just give me a short version of what asset versus stock purchasing means?
Yes, there are two ways to buy a business. The asset purchase means you just buy the things that belong to that business, equipment, customer list, the goodwill, the name, sometimes contracts, and you leave the legal entity behind. You're not buying the company, the entity. And this is beneficial to the buyer because if someone comes in later after you purchase, they come and they try to sue that entity, you do not inherit the liabilities. They cannot sue you as the buyer. So you get a fresh start. But then there's also a tax advantage. You get a fresh depreciation schedule on the assets you bought, which just means you can deduct, right, over time the value of that equipment. And it resets the tax clock and you get to start writing off the full purchase price all over again, like the equipment was brand new. So it's a huge tax benefit to the buyer.
Yeah. And then the stock purchase?
Yes, so the stock purchase is the opposite when you buy the company itself. This happens with much bigger deals when you need the entity because there is value locked into the entity, licenses, permits, long-term contracts. If it's a company that's publicly traded, they have stocks and all those things get transferred. You cannot really do an asset purchase most of the time on those big deals. So the stock purchase helps when you need that value that's locked into specific contracts that are not easily transferable. But for most new buyers, the asset purchase is what they would probably use.
All right. Yeah, that's what I was wondering. What if it's our first, second time, what should we do? Um, so yeah, can we go into those aspects of how to structure a deal? Where do you start?
Yeah, when it comes to structuring the deal, you are trying to answer the question, how do I pay for this? Cash
Uh-huh.
at close is one option, but no one really has hundreds of thousands of dollars laying around. Even people who have assets and money, they don't keep cash in the bank or they don't keep cash in under their mattress. So you have to come up with ways to pay for the business. Some of the creative ideas, seller financing, we talk about it every now and then in our videos, where the seller becomes the bank and carries the note. Sometimes, if they like you, they trust you that you can pay the note, they might finance 80% of the purchase price. So imagine if you're buying $1 million business and they finance 80%, 800,000 of that can be financed by the seller. Sometimes they finance the whole thing. Of course, it's much harder to find those sellers, but it's possible. I have seen it done many times, and I've had a couple of instances where we went that route. And you pay the seller over time. There is what's called the SBA 7A. It's an SBA loan, government-backed loan, where up to 5 million, they will cover 90% of the purchase price. You have to usually come up with 10%. The seller can finance 5%, you can finance 5%. Now, the SBA loan requirements change all the time. So at the time of us recording this video, that's usually what happens. 2 days ago, I saw something online where they're saying that SBA is going to get you up to $10 million. So all of a sudden, people have access to more money. And the SBA loans are really great because they're over 10 years. So that means you have more cash flow. You do pay more in interest, but you have a lot more cash flow per month. That's why a lot of people like them. Equipment financing. If the business has quite a bit of equipment, it's much easier to finance the equipment rather than finance the goodwill price of the loan. So that's why sometimes people buy the business and maybe I've had it one time where we gave ourselves 60 days to pay the equipment. And the seller was willing to because it was a smaller business. He couldn't find a good buyer. He was willing to give us up to 75 days to pay the equipment. So you can purchase the business and then get a loan on the equipment and then pay the person. Much easier to do than other types of loans. There are businesses who have accounts receivables, and the people who have to pay the business, right, make up the accounts receivable. And in that case, you can finance some of it. Again, it depends on how you structure the deal. Some people who sell the business, they want to keep their accounts receivables because they did the work. And this is when you have net 30, net 60, net 90 terms, meaning you do the service, you send the item to the customer, they pay you later. So these are just some ways you can finance inventory if the business comes with inventory. Let's imagine a stone yard, a yard that sells stones, or a chemical uh, place that has a lot of inventory. You might be able to finance that inventory if you buy it as part of the deal. These are just a few of the options.
Yeah, that's so crazy to me because before you even write your own check, the assets of the business are already paying for a big piece of the business themselves. That's
Yeah,
just
it depends on how you structure it because there are things you can do before getting ownership of the business, and there are things you can do after. So those are two different things, and you have to figure out what can I do before, what can I do after. You have to have control of the assets to be able to do equipment financing or inventory financing. But then the next layer of questions you have to ask is like, how do you structure the price itself? And there are people in some of the deals we've done where the seller was willing to do an earnout. Uh, that simply means part of the price is contingent on the business hitting certain targets, performance targets after close. If the seller believes in this business and they trust that you are not gonna destroy the business, they might be willing to do an earnout and you pay them right based on the specific performance targets you come up with. Um, if the seller wants 2 million and you think it's worth 1.4 million upfront, you can give them 1.4 million upfront, and then you say, the other 600,000, I will give it to you if we hit certain revenue targets or profit numbers. And it's a lot of times it's easy to pay them if you hit those numbers. So you structure it in such a way that you are able to afford to pay them. But then you're sharing the risk. That's the thing, right? That whether you do earnouts or performance bonuses to the seller or any type of holdbacks. When I was talking to an HVAC company, they offer warranty on their work. They've been around for 20 years. So imagine someone who had work done on their HVAC system comes back to me after I bought the business. I'm gonna have to take care of that client. I don't want the name of the business to be the branding to be affected. So you can do holdbacks where you keep a specific amount in escrow, and then you can take care of these warranties or anything that comes up after the sale. So these are, again, types of things you can build into how you structure the deal to be able to protect yourself and then also give the seller what they want.
Yeah, it sounds to me though some of them benefit the buyer more than the seller. So why would a seller agree to some of these even? It just sounds like it's mind-blowing to me that they would agree, I guess.
Yes.
Some of
Well,
these.
the way you have to think about it, it's a negotiation,
Okay.
and you're trying to come up with a win-win situation. I was talking to a business owner, a service business locally, and they wanted a certain amount of money. So I told them, if I pay you cash using an SBA loan, I can only pay you this much. Let's just make up numbers so that I don't give away any, things that are covered by NDA. Let's assume I said I can pay you $300,000 if I give you an SBA loan. We go through the process, you get the money. Or I can give you 500,000, which is what you want for this business. It was obviously a smaller business, but I pay you over time. So you become the bank and there is more risk on your part, but you also make more over time. And this person didn't really need the money. So when the seller is close to like retirement age, or it's a distressed seller or a motivated seller because they've already built a retirement fund, they've made quite a bit of money off of the business, they are willing to do these types of structures. So some of these things help the seller, some of them are going to help the buyer, but it has to be a win-win. It has to work on both sides. The seller should want to help you succeed. And again, it goes back to that conversation and building trust. If, right, there is trust between the two of you, then it's just a matter of coming up with an alternative that takes care of both sides. I should never make a deal where I willingly make it just want to protect myself, and I'm not willing to create a deal that also benefits the seller. So it's a little bit of negotiation. That's why it's important to know what options we have.
Yeah, to me, it sounds like just the relational aspect is so important, not price alone, but building that relationship between the buyer and the seller and just building trust is really key to working a workable deal for both parties.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. And when you're talking about bigger deals, there are a lot of other things to consider. When you talk about PE firms, family offices investing in businesses, they offer higher multiples, and then they look at a lot of other types of things. We focus just on the smaller type of deals, and we mentioned some of the options that would work in a smaller deal. But there are dozens of other ways to think creatively. The purpose of this video and the purpose of our community is to remind people that a price is not the only thing that matter. You're talking about relationships where you're trying to come up with a win-win option, and often the only way to do a deal is to come up with a creative way. So when the seller understands that, when the buyer understands that, you can engineer a deal that fits that price. And this is important. About 70% of businesses listed for sale do not sell. And it's
Mhm.
possible that they don't sell because the sellers are not open to some of these creative structures. So for a seller, it's important to consider it. Would you much rather get, I don't know, $500,000 rather than nothing? If they're ready to retire, they don't have kids who want to take over. I actually heard about a business 2 hours away where the seller did not get the price he wanted, and he just started to sell the equipment piece by piece. There was someone who wanted to give him a lower amount, and he said no. You can come up with a creative solution where what if that person gives you what you said and then does an earn out or a performance based? If these clients stay with me and I'm able to continue to make as much profit revenue that you did, I will give you an extra amount. That way you can get a lot more out of it. Selling the equipment piece by piece made him very little money. So there are times where the seller is unwilling to, and the business closes, and that, in my opinion, is a loss.
Yeah, for sure. So as a buyer, how would I actually figure out my deal complexity tolerance? Where do I start? What kind of questions do I do? Where do I even begin? It feels overwhelming when there's so many options out there.
That's true. And one way to look at it is learn about a handful of options that apply to the type of deal structure you would do. I'm not going to look at what options are available for $100 million businesses because I'm not buying those types of businesses yet. So buy most of the businesses under 10 million. So that's what I should spend time on, understanding just a few options that apply to the type of businesses I'm buying. So that's one thing. Two, are you comfortable negotiating? If I come to the table with a desire to come up with a win-win solution, and I'm really trying to ask better questions to identify what the seller wants, then I'm able to come up with a better deal structure. But that requires me to ask better questions, to have the right mindset and motivation. And then you can also get some of these ideas if you have the right team around you, a transactional attorney, a CPA who understands buying and selling businesses, maybe a deal coach who can help you structure some of these things. I remember talking to some mentors myself in the past, and they gave me ideas that I didn't even consider because they've done hundreds of deals. So it's important to have conversations with people who have done it. And that's how you figure out, right, your deal complexity tolerance, and that's how you grow your ability to come up with creative options.
Yeah, that's so great. But if the structure is feeling like overhead, it's just too complicated, um, I guess where would you say to start if it's feeling overwhelming?
At any point, staying on the simpler side is better, whether it's a simpler business rather than a complex business, whether it's a simpler structure rather than a complex structure. Try to simplify it just to take action and move forward. The first deal you do is not it's not the only deal that you have to do in life. Each deal is going to teach you some things. So just start by doing, and as you make mistakes, all of us have made mistakes. Even some of the smartest people in business acquisitions have made mistakes. As you learn, you build your toolbox, you build your creative options for operating and funding and building the businesses. And then you keep growing. Maybe you add a second business. You can sell the initial deal you've done after a year or two, then go to the second one and the third and the fourth. And it becomes easier and easier, kind of like driving. If you think back of the first time you drove in a parking lot, it felt hard. It felt difficult. Um, I don't know about you, but there were times when I thought, I don't think I can do this on the freeway. It feels too risky. And then it becomes second nature. Buying a business, selling a business is the same thing. You have to do it. You have to start taking action. You're going to make mistakes. You have to listen to other mentors to avoid as many mistakes as you can, but you will make mistakes. So just start doing it. Stay on the simpler side if you have to, but just start doing. That's the best way to do it.
Yeah, the biggest takeaway for me is this really creates so many more opportunities. It creates hope, a feeling, instead of just shutting down a deal immediately, of just the idea that there's so many options, but we just have to be creative and come up with other options. So thanks so much for sharing.
That's the purpose of having a community like the Biz Buying Lab. We get to share some of the things we've done. You get to learn from us. I was talking to a person involved in startups, and he's involved in multi-million-dollar startups. I told him how I used 0% business credit card, 0% interest business credit cards to come up with a down payment for a business, and he was blown away. This guy is very good at business. He's done plenty of things. And he couldn't believe that I bought a small local business by using 0% interest credit cards, business credit cards. So that's why we have a community. So join the community and let's share and let's help you come up with the right deal for yourself.